Hey guys, welcome to her Zoom Reality Hub. This is your host Esme, along with Andrea, and today we are going to be discussing the lecture that I read called No One Greater Than John. So, Andrea, what did you think about this lecture? I know you hadn't read it before, right?
Yeah, actually, when I saw the title of the video, I was surprised. It's definitely never not a lecture I've ever heard before. It honestly did take me a couple times to listen to it to really like grasp what Neville was saying. And I am curious too, what made you choose this lecture? I know you originally planned to read No One Greater Than Self, or No One to Change But Self. I'm mixing up the into titles. Um, so yeah, I'm curious what made you like want to shift your direction this week.
Yeah, so actually, No One to Change But Self is actually a very long lecture, and I
Yeah.
would have to do that in two parts, right? So I like I said, like No One to Change But Self is like one of my favorite absolute, lectures that I love.
hmm
But I also really, really enjoy this lecture as well. And this is a lecture that I actually came across not so long ago, about 2 weeks ago as well.
Oh wow.
And I absolutely loved it. And I don't know if like after reading it,
Mhm.
maybe try to guess why I love it.
Yeah, honestly, it did like I said, it did take me a few times listening to it to really grasp everything. Like, honestly, the first time I listened to your recording, it was like the morning after you posted it while I was getting ready, and I was like, I'm a little lost. And so I read it again, and still I was like I feel like I would grasp like small messages from it, and then kind of get confused further down the line, and then finally I kind of gave it one more listen and read at the same time, and I feel like I finally grasped what he was saying. I mean, just knowing you, you talk about the law a lot. I think you probably really appreciate just that he talks about having the kingdom of heaven within. I know, were you vegan before or vegetarian?
Oh, I was a vegan for about a year, and then I was a vegetarian for two.
Okay, so I don't know if that's something that stood out to you, but when I was reading it, I was like, oh, Esme was a vegan. um, but yeah, what about the lecture makes it part of your favorites?
It has a little bit of everything, honestly. It
Mm-hmm.
has, when he met Abdullah, it talks about that. It talks about how he met him, I think in 1929,
Yeah.
and then 1933 is when he told Abdullah, told Neville, are you going to go to Barbados?
Mm-hmm.
You want to go to Barbados. And Neville was like, yeah, I want to go. And Abdullah told him, well, then you're now in Barbados. And it also tells that part of Abdullah closing the door on him as
Mm-hmm.
well whenever Neville was doubting, right?
Yeah.
It includes a part two of, well, this whole like relevant of it, no one being greater than John,
Mm-hmm.
because John was very, what do I want to say? What does the lecture say, right? Like he didn't drink wine and he didn't eat bread. So he
Yeah.
was depriving himself of like the goodness because he said that he was going to go to the kingdom, right, if he didn't do any of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And in this lecture, Abdullah did everything. Like he ate everything, he drank everything, but he enjoyed his life. And he was like 80 years old at that point, right?
Yeah.
And Neville was a vegetarian, and he was also celibate. So
Yeah,
it's
I
like,
think that's so interesting he included that because like I think especially like within the like spiritual community, like I don't know how much you're in that world or like see people kind of posting that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of like talk around like celibacy specifically right now, and I'm like, oh,
mm-hmm.
like that was even a thing in Neville's day.
Well, it's funny because this practices, like this talks about the practices of a vegetarianism and being celibate, and I've
hmm
actually done that myself in my own life. So that's it really resonated with me, and it was so funny.
Yeah. No, I think when I read it too, like I think the part that clicked for me was kind of thinking about I guess examples of that now that we see in like I guess this modern day. I think again, I'm seeing that a lot in the spiritual community, especially is like, oh, like if I'm a vegetarian and I do all these things and I'm good and I'm a good person, like I'm gonna ascend to this higher level and I'm gonna ascend past the world and like be at this like higher plane than everybody else because I'm sacrificing so much and I'm withholding so much from myself. And I think the lecture's kind of pointing to that and saying like, no, the kingdom heaven is within. You don't need to deprive yourself of like anything out here. Those things aren't what gets you to heaven.
Yeah, exactly. And the lecture says, it says John is doing violence, trying to gain the kingdom of heaven by being good.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not it. You can enjoy everything. You're here on this earth to enjoy the earthly goodness.
No, truly. And I think, yeah, I mean, when I first kind of like started my own like spiritual path and things like that, I used to think that I was like, oh, like, the reason I'm not ascending is because like I'm doing these habits and they're bad, and so that makes it like so I'm like a unpure vessel or whatever. Even like we'll see it in like religious context of like, you're a sinner, and if you're doing all these bad things, you don't get to go to heaven with God. Like I feel like you can see it in every different type of spiritual belief or religious belief, and so when things kind of like clicked more for me with the lecture, I really really resonated with that.
Okay, so in the lecture, Neville did say how he manifested going to Barbados, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
Abdullah told him. And when he was on that trip, when he came back, he changed. He finally ate meat. He drank alcohol. And, he probably had some fun too. He didn't
Yeah.
mention not being not celibate, but, but I'm assuming, he said he wasn't practicing any of that anymore. And
Yeah. And he said even like was it on the boat coming back where he said he didn't even like think about it?
he didn't think about not eating it. Like, he just ate it, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean is like it said something about him like getting soup and he didn't even like question if the soup had meat in it. He just like ate the soup.
Right, right. And to me, how a lot of people are like, oh, the bridge of accident, like, no, incidents, my bad, the bridge of incidents.
The bridge of accidents shit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
He didn't think about eating that soup.
Mhm.
And to me, it goes back into like when people talk about the bridge of incidents, some people are questioning it, and you don't question it, right? Neville changed his state. He didn't
Mhm.
question, and that was it. That was the bridge. Him being on the boat, coming back from Barbados to America after his trip, and he just ate the soup. He just drank the
Mhm.
wine, and then he didn't care. It just happened because he changed a state.
Yeah. No, exactly. And I think that's something that really stands out to me too with the laws. I think a lot of people hear about this like bridge of incidents and these things that'll happen to you that like sort of lead you to your manifestation or lead your manifestation to happening. I think a really important thing to know is like you're not going to know that the bridge of incidents is happening. Like you're not going to be like it's just the bridge. You're just going to be doing stuff and it's just going to happen. And you're going to be able to look back and realize like, "Oh, like this is what led me here."
Exactly. Right. I'm actually reading the lecture as we're talking right now too, and
Mhm.
I'm reading that part right there where it was like everything that I had not done in 7 years, I did that night. And then from then on, for the 10 or 12 days at sea till I got off the ship in New York City, you know, he did it. And Abdullah had told him, "You will die." But he was telling him, "Your old state will die." The old state of deprivation, right? Where you're depriving yourself of the alcohol, the food, and everything else.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed this lecture, especially just kind of like hearing more about Neville's own journey and like you said, him talking about meeting Abdullah and everything. Do you think there's ever been a time in your life, like when you were vegetarian or vegan, were you like doing that essentially in like the way that Neville's talking about, or like when have you been in this kind of state of John?
Yeah, I was actually in the state of John when I was practicing celibacy.
Hmm.
So that really hit me because it was like, okay, you're doing a violence to yourself.
Yeah.
And it is a state. It was a state where I felt like being celibate was like, oh, I'm holier than thou or something like that, right?
Hmm.
Like I'm pure. God, I'm so pure or something like that. But it was just a state, right? And the state passed. And he says that right here, like you don't try to invite that state. It just happens. I'm reading a sentence right here.
Hmm.
You don't understand why it happens, right? In his own case, he was raised with food, fish, fowl, meat, eggs, butter.
Hmm.
And he said that he was in a restaurant, I believe in New York City, and he had ordered a steak. And apparently for him, like when he was trying to cut that steak, he couldn't eat it. right? And he was like, it was like an animal. But like fast forward to when Abdullah told him you're gonna die, like your state's going to die. He didn't care. He ate the meat. So he ate whatever was put in front of him. And he's talking
Yeah.
about how everyone passes through a state like that. And I feel like, I mean, I'm interpreting this in like my own way, right? Also, like, okay, it doesn't have to be that state of like, oh, I'm a vegetarian, I'm celibate, and this is this and that. I feel like it's talking about every single state. So if you're in a state of feeling poor, you're doing violence to yourself. If you're in a state of feeling unloved, you're doing a violence to yourself. And we're all passing through those states where we're doing violence to ourselves. But we can change it. It just passes.
Yeah, no, I didn't see it that way at first. It's kind of like we even passed through that state, like you said, by just being in that state of like lovelessness or of poor, essentially just like the opposite of your desire. Um, I think that's something that's amazing about the law is kind of being able to realize that you're the one who's causing that to yourself. I was reading Seth earlier, and I can't remember the exact quote. I know this is about Neville, but um, oh no, maybe it was from Neville. I can't remember. I was either listening to a lecture or I was reading Seth, and he kind of talked about how man, I think it was Seth. Doesn't matter. Okay. Man basically doesn't want to like take that responsibility of like knowing that you are creating all of this. Like it's hard to like see that and kind of take that on, but once you take that on, you're giving yourself the greatest freedom because yeah, all this like sucks. Like if you take on that responsibility and actually hone in on it and decide that you want better for yourself, then you have all the ability to get rid of this and not experience anymore. But you talked about how like that's a really hard, and it doesn't have to be hard, but it's a difficult thing for man to take on, like a, I can't think of the word, not like a heavy responsibility, but I think sometimes it takes like a certain mental level, I guess, of strength to be able to like look at yourself and see the mistakes that you're causing in your life and not blame everything outside of you. Blame yourself, I guess, essentially.
Yeah. And it says it in the lecture too, actually. You know, he has another paragraph right here. It says, causation is mental. It is not physical. Right? And John didn't know that. The state called John didn't know that. If I restricted myself and resisted the impulse, I thought, well, am I not wonderful? I have just abided by the law. Right? But, right, that's it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's mental. It's not physical. Like, whatever you want, you can give it to yourself. And whatever you're restricting yourself from, you're restricting it mentally. And you can pass through that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go to the next paragraph too. And this is all in the lecture, right? And this is why I like talking about the lecture that I read. I like talking about that and
Yeah.
just discussing it and bringing about everything that's in it. And then we can talk about it here. Right. It says after the one that I just read about causation is mental. He says that next comes this next state called Jesus Christ. You know, and that state tells me that wasn't good enough. The wheel is turning and you're going to do it tomorrow. The wheel will turn now, and tomorrow when it turns all over again, you will be performing the act. And you'll be wondering, why has this happened to me? And it says, let's see. So he's just saying like whatever it is that you're thinking and you're actually doing in your mind, you're going to see it and you're going to be performing whatever it is that's mentally out here in this 3D world. Then he says, so everyone is moving through a series of states, and it starts from Adam, all the way like, well, it started from Abraham. That's what it says. And that's where real civilization begins. It does compare it a lot with the Bible. I know that, but every single name there, and he states that in the beginning, every single name that the Bible has on there is just a state. So from Abraham all the way to Jesus Christ, that's a state.
Yeah, no, I really love hearing about Neville's I think I talked about this in our last kind of episode we recorded together is just hearing Neville's perspective on the Bible and kind of viewing it from a different light. Like I know me and you have talked about this. Like whenever I see a Bible quote Before, honestly, it used to like irritate me. I'd be like, oh, like shut up. No offense to religious people. If you're religious, all love to you. But that's just how I personally felt about it when I saw it. And now when I see like Bible quotes, I literally think they're so beautiful. I'm just like, oh, yes, amen. Because of Neville and because I see it from a different perspective. And I think it's just kind of like a text that guides us through this human experience and like why we're here for whatever reason. Um, and yeah, the different states of consciousness that we pass through until we get to that level of realizing that heaven is within, you know?
Yeah, I love it. Do you want to talk a little bit about, how he did, the manifesting part, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, everything's manifestation, right? Everything. But he does talk about here, and I know that, some of these viewers just want to be like, okay, yeah. But what about the
Mm-hmm.
love? What about the manifesting? So,
They're like, how do we do it?
right. I do want to say he said here, like, repent. He talks about
Mm-hmm.
being like repentance. And he says, repent is a radical change of attitude towards anything that happens to you in this world. I don't care what is happening. Repent. Don't let it happen as it is happening. Change it in your mind's eye solely, right? As I did in New York City, without one nickel in my pocket. Not a nickel. And Barbados is 2,000 miles away across water, so you can't walk. And he tells me, you are now in Barbados. So who was telling him was Abdullah.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, Neville wasn't worried about the money because he didn't have it. He said he had no money to
Mm-hmm.
go to Barbados. Right. And when he did that, he did what Abdullah told him. Clothe yourself with Barbados. And if you are in Barbados, how would you know you are? Look at the world. And so he did this. He said, so I think of Barbados, and there it is, 2,000 miles to the north of me. So I sleep in that state to
Mm-hmm.
find that someone 2,000 miles away is moved to bring me a ticket to Barbados. And that was his brother, Victor.
Yeah.
So every night he went to sleep in that state. And he brings it up here that he started this in November, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or October, I believe October, like late October. And all of November, he slept in that state. And he tried to go to Abdullah, but Abdullah closed the door on him. And he was like, if you're already in Barbados, then why will I talk to you about it? Why will I talk to you about somewhere you already are and
Mm-hmm.
discuss it with you? Because if I discuss it with you, then, then you're in lack. You're not in it anymore.
Yeah. No, I love that. I'm like, I feel like he's really just honing in on the fact that like we talked about in The Feeling is the Secret and discussing that. He's talking about being in the state akin to sleep and kind of going to sleep with that knowing and that feeling and then like carrying that with you throughout the day and not questioning and be like, well, like where is it? Why am I not in Barbados? You know what I mean?
Yeah. He talks a lot about clothing yourself here. You
Mm-hmm.
clothe yourself in that state. And then later in that lecture he also said, like, how would it feel if you were rich? How would it feel if you were not embarrassed, if you were embarrassed?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And this is personal. Like, if you want love, how would you feel if you were loved? Just ask yourself that, and then bring about the state, and
Yeah.
you
No, I
wear
think
it.
that's so.
Yeah.
Oh, I think that's so important. Like me and you were talking about before we got on the call is kind of like, um, making that thing like feel exciting for you if that's what you think it would feel like. And so I feel like for me personally, that really helps me bring in that state is like, how would I feel if this was happening like right now in this moment? Um, and honestly, it just feels like so good, and I'm just like, I love that about the law.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I love this. I'm keep reading it, and I'm just like, oh yeah, really, like, he says it right here.
Mm-hmm.
It says, how do you do it? How do you clothe yourself? You clothe yourself with the state, just as though it were true. And as you clothe yourself with it, wait. And you're told, who really believe, the people who really believe, they don't make it so. It is so. It already is so. So you're not trying. You're already
Mm-hmm.
being it. You're already being that person who has that clothing. So you're wearing that clothing, you're wearing the state. Right? And he says, that's why when I discussed it with Abdullah, he never discussed it with me. When I asked him how I would go to Barbados, he wouldn't answer me because he was trying to show me If you really are clothed with the feeling of being in Barbados, how could you and I sit down and discuss how you're going to get there? How could we possibly discuss this? So he wouldn't discuss it with him, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, no, if you really are doing what I told you to do, you say you are in Barbados, well, then you can't discuss how you're going to go. And Neville
I love
says,
it. I'm like,
right, right.
yes, yes.
I mean, it is true. Yeah. Neville says, like, if I said to you, you are now rich and today you owe rent, can you and I discuss how you're going to become rich if I tell you that you are and ask you to clothe yourself with wealth? So if I ask you to clothe with any state in this world and then it doesn't hatch out tomorrow because tomorrow is not the moment of hatching out, but you're anxious, and then you say to me, but where is it coming from? How will it come? Should I really discuss it with you? And he says, I would not. That is a lack of faith on your part if you say, well, I'm wearing it. If I'm wearing it, it should be just as real as to you as the room is real. And that's the good news of the kingdom of God.
I'm like, yes, I love that so much. And I think one thing too that's like really standing out to me that I think is important, especially if you're like kind of new to the law, is to know that you don't have to like be like crazy. Like you don't have to go around like imagining like you're walking with your I mean like, if you can mentally picture that, that's fine. But you don't have to like I feel like when he's saying like clothing and going about being in the state, it doesn't mean that you're like having to imagine that or do that 24/7. It's walking around with the knowing that it's done because you already experienced it inside. And that's
Yeah,
something that used to trip me up. Like, do I have to pretend that this is happening constantly or like, pretend I'm in a completely different house and it's like, no, you can just do that internally and then go about the rest of your day and you don't have to like really think about it much. You just know that it's already done because you believe in the law and you believe in what you did inside of you.
right. And he says it right there. You just let it hatch out. You
Mhm.
don't worry about it. Don't be anxious about it. It already is so, right? So it's amazing. I don't know. I love the law. It doesn't have to be that hard. You can honestly, right? I'm gonna bring up Seth.
Mhm.
Seth has an exercise that's what 5 minutes. You do the feeling for 5 minutes. You feel whatever it would feel like if you had that desire for 5 minutes, and then you go about your day. But you don't contradict yourself. That's the most
Yeah.
important part, right? The mental diet.
No. And that's something I've struggled with for sure. But utilizing exercises like that are sort of more helpful for me at least. Like if I have, I don't think you should make it a chore or it should feel like this like heavy burden or this like thing that you have to do all the time. But like for me it's like, okay, like I'm just chilling. I'm going to go like sit in this chair and like just for a few minutes I'm going to close my eyes and imagine how I would feel if this was happening. And those things are really helpful for me personally.
No, same here. It's also very helpful, and I know it doesn't have to be taxing,
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to be difficult. It's honestly something that can be fun. Manifesting
Yeah,
is
and it's
fun.
not something you like have to do to manifest either, but for
Exactly.
me
Yeah.
personally, it helps. Sorry, I keep interrupting you, girl.
No, you're fine.
For me personally, though, I think it helps my mental diet, like stay throughout the day on those things that maybe I've had more challenge with for whatever reason, based on my own beliefs. But we all have those spots.
Yeah, I do too. I'm not perfect. No one is.
100%. So I just think those little exercises and using techniques like SATs, like I don't. The reason I'm so like hesitant whenever we do talk about these topics is that I remember being at a point with the law where I felt like I had to do these things and it did feel exhausting and I felt like I was like constantly chasing this thing like, oh, I have to do SATs tonight, and then I'd like wake up and I'd be like, fuck, I didn't do SATs, and I'd be so upset about it. And so I always like just like to say, I'm like, you don't have to do any of this to manifest. So like if there's a day where it didn't happen, like it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're staying in the state. But for me, these techniques help me stay in the state when there's, you know, quote unquote bigger things that I really want to bring in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. I know a lot of people actually, or I don't want to say a lot. I know a few people that
Hmm.
are at a point with the law where they just like all of a sudden you're like, okay, I have a desire. And they'll be like, from this moment on, I already have it. And they
Hmm.
manifest it because you don't really need to do anything. The key is you, right?
Yeah, and
There's
I
nothing
also
else.
think as you gain like more experience with the law and you like see those things manifest, I would assume, like, I think it's easier to no, I don't want to say like easier because I'm like, you can just cultivate that for yourself, but it would be easier to have that faith of knowing that, like, oh yeah, like, cool, I got this, I know what to do,
Yeah. It isn't really hard.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say it's hard, right? But I also don't want to say like it's easy, but I feel that it is easy. It's just that it's a lot of mental. I don't know if you feel that way, Andrea. I know it is, but it's making a decision. So it's you making that decision that, okay, this is the desire. It came about. I want it. I'm going to have it. And that's it. And use um the tools like affirmations or sats or
Mm-hmm.
whatever you want to do. You use those to convince yourself that you already have whatever it is that you want, to clothe yourself in the state
Mm-hmm.
of whatever it is that you want, right? And you stay faithful, and that's how it comes about. You don't even have to use the tools like Andrea has said. You don't have to do any of that, but it is helpful, right? As somebody who's newer to the law, it honestly helps a lot.
I feel like it's simple, but it's not always easy, like, to make those changes. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that, like, not that you're putting limitations on it or saying, like, this is some, like, hard thing that you have to work at, but, like, ultimately, we're all born. I mean, not everyone, but a lot of people are born, like, kind of with these preconceived ideas of what the world is. And so I think when you first start discovering the law, it takes a certain amount of discipline to, you know, shift that thinking and kind of like start seeing it in your reality. Especially with those things, like I said, I think we all have our struggle areas, but especially those things that we all maybe have more difficulty with, for whatever reason. Like, maybe someone's like always struggled with their health since they were born. It makes sense that it might take them a little longer to sort of shift those beliefs than it would if they have always had like really amazing relationships in their life and love comes really easily to them. And that's all built based off our beliefs, but we've been building these beliefs for a lifetime. And so, again, not that it's hard or that's going to take you forever, all this like deep inner work to heal, but I think that's an important thing to remember. If you feel discouraged, because you hear a lot of times people are like, oh, it doesn't have to be hard, but it feels hard. To like allow yourself that space to kind of, figure shit out. And it's all our own journey, it's all our own path. It's the different states of consciousness we pass through. So,
Yep. And that's on point with the lecture too. It's all
hmm
states, and they're all passing states. You don't want to stay in the state of John, where he says
yeah.
where you're depriving yourself of whatever it is that you want. I do, want to talk about methods in the one of our next podcasts. I think that would be like perfect for methods
hmm
for beliefs. I don't want to talk about like method for manifesting, but it is all
Yeah.
included, right? But I want to maybe let the audience know like, hey, like these are some of the methods that you can use to change your belief. And changing a belief is actually like it can be like this, right? Like I can just be like,
hmm
oh, I don't think I'm good enough. Okay, I identified it. No, I am good enough, and that's it. Right? I changed it. But maybe we should talk a little bit about some of the stuff that has been helpful for us. And I know a lot of these are also in the books. I know it's
hmm
like Neville or Seth. And I know like, we saying that this is Neville, but we will be talking about Seth as well in this channel.
Yeah. No, I really love Seth, and I think that'd be a great thing to talk about. Because yeah, those different methods can be super helpful, and I think it's, as long as you're finding what fits for you and what feels natural and what doesn't feel like hard work or make you feel worse, then I think it's great to use methods to change your beliefs.
Yeah, that would be perfect. If we could talk about this sometime.
hmm
I'm not too sure when, Andrea. Would you feel that maybe 2 episodes from now, or what is your next one that you have in store for us?
Yeah. So next time I will be reading a lecture, which will come out on Sunday. And then next Tuesday, Esme, I know you're going to be out of town, so I'm going to upload a SATS meditation. Um, like you can use like whether you're going to sleep or if you're just wanting to do SATS in the middle of your day. Um, Can help you with like changing those beliefs, changing your state, things like that.
Oh, that's delightful. That's perfect.
Yeah. No, I mean, I listened to my own, I have it ready and recorded already. And I listened to it and I really liked it. I got to my office today to get to work and I had like 30 minutes and I was like, well, I'm gonna like read for 10 minutes and I'm gonna do like some stats. And I was just playing it to like hear what the audio sounded like to make sure everything like equalized. And I was like, well, I'll just like try it. And I really enjoyed it. And so that's something I enjoy like incorporating into my day. If there's something that I need more assistance in changing my state in. And so I'm excited to share it with everyone.
I'm looking forward to it. I will have to go ahead and listen to it. And I know you have such a soothing, calming voice, so I'm stoked
Oh.
about that.
I think your voice is so calming. Listening to the reading, I was like, I just want Esme to always read.
Thank you. Thank you. But, you know, I think we should wrap this one up just because
Yeah.
the one greater than John lecture, I feel like we touched like, a lot of the things. I don't want to say everything, but a lot of the things that were in the lecture itself. Unless you have
Yeah.
something else to say. I don't know how you feel.
No, I feel the same way. I think we touched on a lot of it. I really enjoyed this lecture. Like you said, kind of hearing how Neville met Abdullah, and just like Barbados. I feel like it's like a famous Neville thing is like you're in Barbados and like a door slam, and so really getting to read about it and hear about the different states of consciousness, especially applied, I think, in those biblical terms, which is just really interesting to me. I really enjoyed this lecture, so thank you for reading it. And yeah, I'm excited to keep recording and keep doing our podcast.
Perfect. I will go ahead and close it out with the last sentence of that lecture, right? So, you go home this night and clothe yourself in the joy of being the man or the woman that you want to be. I will tell you, it will not fail you. Now let us go into the silence. And that's perfect. That's divine.
The perfect way to end this episode. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys are enjoying. Please subscribe, and I will see you guys on Sunday. I'm not sure what lecture I'm going to read yet, but I will read something good.
Bye.
Bye.